Welcome into another edition of New Track Record. Caleb Hatch and Justin Kinney with you, ready to recap a speed-filled, drama-filled weekend at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for Indy 500 qualifying. Alex Palou, your pole sitter. Graham Rahal out, now back in. We'll get to all of that, but first, hello, Justin.
Hello. Is it race week? Do we have a race this weekend?
We do. There is a race this weekend.
Excellent.
I have been informed there is a race this
You
weekend.
have been informed.
Yes.
The powers that be have told you that there, yes, indeed, is a race coming up on Sunday.
It is Indy 500 race week. So much going on. In fact, on the podcast, we have a lot of content coming your way. If you missed it earlier this week, we've already posted interviews with Simon Pagenaud, the 2019 winner, both Foyt drivers, Santino Ferrucci, and Benjamin Peterson. Plus, be on the lookout for even more driver interviews that will drop this week as well. In fact, I think you're going to be pretty excited for some of the drivers we have coming up the rest of this week. In particular, it will drop Thursday, Friday, and one on Saturday morning just to space them out a little bit. Plus, don't forget, we'll have our Indy 500 Carb Day live show at IMS. If you're not in the Fort Wayne area and can't listen on the radio from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, don't worry. You can listen 1380thefan.com, 1380thefan app. That's a free download. Or on your smart speaker, and you can send texts our way or tweets our way. Text, it's simple. 46862 is the text line number, and then you can text us your Indy 500 related questions, or you can always tweet IndyCar Podcast is our handle on Twitter. So those are ways to get in touch with us during the live show. But let's first recap qualifying, then we'll get into Graham Rahal out, then back into the Indy 500 field and some other interesting news we've had throughout the week. Indy 500 qualifying. So Saturday, and I was there over the weekend, both days. Saturday, I was actually cold.
Really?
Because we were in the shade in the E-Penthouse. I had brought like a quarter zip pullover and left it in my friend's car when we parked. That was a mistake because we were cold basically the whole day, sitting there in shorts and a t-shirt. But the weather was otherwise great, especially if you're in the sun. Great crowd on hand. In fact, 85,000 over the 2 days, the biggest qualifying crowd since 2013, and it was noticeable. Like it was noticeably up over the weekend. So plain and simple, when you have faster speeds, I think you're going to draw more people. I also think that culturally, the Indy 500, I don't know if it was the pandemic or people coming back. I feel like it's kind of in this rebirth phase again.
I would agree. I think that was even before the pandemic. I think the pandemic then fueled it afterwards, particularly when you didn't have any fans in 2020. And I also think, at least to me, I think bumping adds a added dynamic too. And we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but just the drama that comes with bumping is just tremendous. And at least to me, is exponentially bigger for me personally for bumping more than the top end of the grid.
The top end, I just want to see fast speeds. But yes, the bumping is way more dramatic, and I think way more meaningful. I think another thing, you talk about crowds being up, a scarcity aspect when you can't go in 2020, and then it was limited in 2021. Last year we had full crowds, and you had 325,000 people or so on race day. We're expecting at or above that on Sunday as far as the crowds, and they're probably not going to sell out of reserve seats, which would trigger the local blackout in the Indy area being lifted for TV. But I think they'll be close, and it wouldn't shock me if we see that happen next year with the addition of Kyle Larson to the field. But I just think when you have storylines like bumping, that's a selling point. And I don't know which day was bigger as far as crowd-wise. It was hard to tell because the timing was different. You know, Saturday was an 11 to 6 affair, whereas Sunday, really, you had a couple practice sessions, but then reality is track activity 2 to 3 and then 4 to 6, basically, to put it simply. So it was a bit different as far as a later arriving crowd. Great weekend, great weather.
I think that had a lot to do with it. Well, maybe not a lot, but an added bonus for people going. It was great weather. It was warm. except you on Saturday. Clear skies relatively, but not brutally hot and not cold, bitter cold either. So great weekend all around for IndyCar.
So let's start with bumping first, because I think that was the more dramatic thing on Sunday afternoon. So it was clear going into the weekend. We thought come Friday, either Callum Ilott or a Rahal car wouldn't make it unless, someone crashed. And obviously that would set them back greatly so going into qualifying day on Saturday. But Ilott and his team, after a very sketchy first run with that new chassis, went back, got it dialed in solidly in the field. No issues for him, as he will now start 27th. Remember, everyone moving up a slot because of Graham Rahal stepping in for Stefan Wilson. So he will start 27th, solidly in the field. I think some of the other surprises, Agustin Canapino actually out-qualified him by a spot.
Yep.
He was solid, and especially after brushing the wall in one of his runs over the weekend.
I think Catherine Legg being the fastest,
yes,
or the least slow RLL car,
that was a surprise. She was locked in on Saturday, and then you get the Rahal car. So Stingray Rob probably expected him to be there. Coyne was slower, but than they've been in years past, but also different engineering staff, different resources, much younger team as far as experience goes. We expected the Rahal cars to be there, quite honestly, going into the weekend. And that was it. Those are the two teams represented, four drivers for 3 spots. And what Jack Harvey was able to do, I think, was probably one of the most wild things I have ever seen in qualifying at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. To go out to be slow, for Graham to be ahead of him in that 33rd spot, and then go out again with 15, 20 minutes remaining and still be slow. You thought, that's it. The clock's going to run down. He'll make one more last ditch effort right before, just because you need time to cool the engine. He did do those cool down laps, and that definitely helped. And there was a deadline as far as when he could go on track to do those, and it had to be outside of the final 15 minutes, I believe.
Yeah.
Then for him to go back out with under 5 minutes remaining and be slower first lap and then steadily improve.
Yeah, it was all about consistency.
Slimmest
for
of
him.
Margins, knock out Graham Rahal was just an unbelievable scene. The reaction from the crowd, the cheering, I think between the cheering and people being absolutely stunned like myself, it was hard to believe that's really what happened. Even though we knew a Rahal car would probably miss the show unless Stingray Rob crashed, and that did not happen.
It lived up to what bumping is and shows how much we missed it. And I've been vocal, too, on this podcast about, look, if you have 34 cars, just start them all. But I've kind of changed my tune based on what happened last weekend and the emotion and the drama that we had despite just bumping, quote unquote, only one car. And I'm down for it. If this would have been a year like the last couple with just 33 cars, we're not talking about as many storylines and chaos as we saw over the weekend. So give me 1, give me 10. I don't care. Just as long as we have extra cars, so we have bumping over qualifying weekend. I think it absolutely delivered. And what Jack Harvey did not only did it put him in the show, did it save his ride for the conclusion of the season at least?
You could easily make the case, because there are rumors going into the season. Marshall Pruitt put on Racer.com in a season preview that their driver's waiting in the wings, and we thought that'd be Ryan Hunter-Reay, and instead he's with Ryan Reinbold, solidly midfield qualifier. But we thought he could be a potential replacement. Linus Lundqvist, who's testing with the team on June 8th, that'll be after Detroit. But I think Jack Harvey's ride, I would say, is safe the rest of the year.
You think so? I'm not there yet. He exits early in the 500, struggles at Detroit. I could still see him being replaced, but at least for the immediate, because auto racing, everybody has short memories, but for the immediate future of Jack Harvey, it's set at least for a couple weeks because of what he did. I mean, it was very impressive, but still just a terrible weekend for Rahal, Letterman, Lanning, and how you get to a point where you're so off, and you've been vocal too about talking about the engineering side, and when you hire an engineer strictly from Formula One who is learning on the fly for ovals, this is part of the reason why you're where you're at.
This is a team, when you look back to 2020, when Sato and Rahal were both in at that time it was the Fast 9. Now they've expanded to the Fast 12, but they were both in the Fast 9. Then Sato leaves the team. He has success at Coyne, now with Ganassi. Obviously, he's still fast. That hasn't changed. And the rest of this Rahal team is absolutely struggling in qualifying. And for this team to go out and hire an F1 guy and Stefano Sorda, okay, look, they had great qualifying pace at the Indy GP. You think about it when you have a new kind of technical director who's newer to IndyCar on the engineering side, it may take some time to get locked in. And that team made a lot of changes in the offseason. They were hoping this change would pay off. But you look at where they're at now compared to previous years in qualifying, like the speed, other teams have gained, 2-3 miles per hour, and this team stayed the same. They're stuck. They're stuck at that 230 mile per hour range for the most part outside of leg. They haven't gained any speed. And this has been a growing problem for the Rahal team as far as qualifying goes, really since that 2020 race.
When McLaren missed the race with Fernando Alonso, they were very vocal in saying this was never going to happen again. And they made sure with their actions and their investment that it hasn't happened again. Will that be the same result we see out of Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan? They're saying all the right things, but will they make the investment? I'm talking they as in Rahal and Letterman and Lanigan. Is you obviously don't have the resources that other teams have. And the resources you do have may have been misguided hires. Are you going to make the decisions that you need to make, both in changes and financial investment, to make sure this doesn't happen again? It can be just word speak right now unless you put it into action. And we'll see if Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan does what McLaren said they were going to do, or we're in the same position next year with Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan.
I mean, look at this. Graham Rahal last year qualified 21st for the 500, highest of his team. 230.766 was his average speed. He went slower this year. So other teams found speed. They lost speed. Christian Lundgaard last year, 31st as a rookie. Jack Harvey, 32nd. Stefan Wilson did not qualify. Well, he qualified, but didn't have a time that was set last year in that partnership. And there are only 33 entries. Now, this year, they had to face the consequences, so to speak, of there being bumping, but they lost speed and they qualified even worse than they did before. And when your fourth car, let's be honest, a lot of people questioned the hire of Catherine Legge only because she'd been away from IndyCar and the Indy 500 for so long. Her last attempt was back in 2013, her last race. So I think that was kind of the concern, but the sponsor specifically wanted her in the car. And she went out and upstaged all the full-time entries of the team. I mean, that shows to me, one, that she's locked in, and that's not a surprise. But also, two, there's some serious issues within that team.
Yeah, it creates more issues in terms of discussion when it's like, hey, our part-time effort was the fastest on qualifying weekend. And she had some dicey moments as she continued to drop as drivers improved their times. But she was safe at 29? She was just in. But that was the highest RLL car. And this is what can't be overstated is just because Graham Rahal is now in the race with Coyne now because of Stefan Wilson's injury.
With Giant Rainbow.
Or Giant Rainbow, excuse me. Doesn't take away the fact that Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan was terrible this weekend or this month so far, this past week, right? And how do they fix that? And maybe it's look at what AJ Foyt Racing did this year at Indy. You know what? We're not going to have any extra cars. We're going to run 2 cars. It's going to be our full-time cars. We're going to consolidate our resources. Yes, they got a lot of capital, which is what Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan needs to do. They need to add an investment, but AJ Foyt made a conscious effort to say, we're not going to add any part-time efforts. We're going to go into this thing with our two drivers that are with us all season long, and we're going to make a run at this thing. And look what had happened. Both drivers get in to the Fast 12, and really good weekend for Foyt altogether for qualifying weekend. Maybe RLL needs to approach this. It took a long time for them to add a third car. You add a fourth for the 500. Like, maybe contraction isn't the worst idea for this team is struggling, not just in Indy. It was the most high profile
They've been struggling in qualifying outside of the Indy GP all year.
Yeah, they've just been not competitive, and people
and
making
Graham has struggled over the years in qualifying just for races, period.
Absolutely. And you look at the GP, and that's when I kind of scoff anytime people say momentum, you can gain it at the GP, because people thought, oh, okay, RLL got it in line at the GP. It obviously had zero carryover to the oval. And is it coincidentally that the best result they've had in terms of qualifying and pace has been an F1 style track in the Indy road course with an F1 engineer? I would say no. So there's so many problems with RLL at this point. Yeah, it's a good story that Graham is now back in the field, albeit unfortunate injury for Stefan Wilson, but that doesn't mask the massive issues that Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan has right now, not just at the 500, but in this series altogether.
And if you're Jared Hildebrand, you have to be disappointed that Foyt didn't pull the trigger on that third car, because
right?
He would have realized, wait a second, I have a shot at the Fast 12, and clearly Chevy, the preferred engine, at least in terms of raw speed. Now, we've seen this before, so I'll caution that. We've seen this before as far as outside of Palou, Chevy was pretty dominant in the Fast 12, but when it comes to race pace and fuel mileage, those are totally different stories.
Totally.
And we'll see how that plays out. But I guess final thoughts on the Rahal team and everything that went down. I like that there were clearly no team orders. They just let this play out how it's supposed to play out. That's what Indy's about. And for Jack Harvey, just an incredible run by him, where the odds are absolutely stacked against you. And yes, we did find out after the fact that Graham had a weight jacker failure on his first lap of his first run that session. Well, his only run that session. Yeah. And obviously you're going to gain more speed being able to use that, and he couldn't use that. And that really set him behind the 8 ball. But for Jack Harvey to go out and do what he did, that's the magic of qualifying at the Indy 500.
That's the beauty that we haven't had the last couple of years in terms of bumping, and you hope this is not a one-year blip. We can, and I've said, 34 sucks, but give me 34 next year. 35 would be great. 36 would be best case. I don't ever see in the immediate future getting back to 40, but just give me extra cars past 33, and it raises the stakes of the entire weekend. An entertainment factor, it's much better. I know people love the speeds at the top end of the grid, Fast 12, Fast 6. All 12 of those drivers that made the Fast 12 are in the race, and you can make a case for them to be able to win the race coming up on Sunday. You can't win it if you don't start it, and that's the beauty of bumping, and it was welcomed back by me, even with just one car last weekend.
And I don't know if you made this point or someone else to me in the last several days. This is incentive for these one-off teams to show up and have a chance.
Yes, it is.
Because Able Motorsports showed up. They were probably lucky that the first day of practice was rained out completely. Then they get on track on Wednesday. They worked through qualifying sims. They didn't even do race, pace kind of practice, race setup. But they were solidly in the field. It was never really a doubt. And Enerson went out, made another run, went quicker. He was good to go. And I think what that team showed, when you have the right personnel in place and a quality driver, and you can go out and win. Now, the key is you have to have your own car, and you have to be able to strike an engine deal. But a last-minute entry like that to show up and do what they did, we weren't talking about Able missing the race going into the weekend. We were talking about the Rahal team. We were talking about
practice,
Juncos,
yeah. But a couple weeks ago, we were saying Able Motorsports, They hadn't done the open test, so they were the clear favorite to miss the race, and they were an afterthought over the weekend in the sense that they weren't in that conversation, and it was very impressive.
So if you have the right people in place, you have your own chassis, and you get the engine, you get everything ready to go, so at least you can be on track to start practice. You have a shot. And so hopefully this opens it up for more one-off entries and not just, the big teams expanding with an extra entry like we've seen over the years, and the true one-off entries going away. But between Dreyer Reinbold's pace every year, and their ability to qualify mid-pack, and Able Motorsports
jumping in,
this is a really big boost, I think, for those people who are maybe on the fence. If you're looking at moving up, this was a sign that, yes, you can do it if you do it right. Especially
with neither of those teams really having a technical alliance with any other type of team.
Yes.
And the fact that, and Nathan Brown had a great article on those last week or the week before at Indy Star, that yes, the conventional wisdom is bigger fields at the 500 are prevented because of just 2 OEMs, but you could still conceivably get to 18 per OEM and get to 36. The problem has been multiple different things. Is, of course, the Honda and Chevy still have reservations, but they could be convinced. But the fact of the matter is there's a lot of, I guess, thoughts that you put together an effort and you're going to be fighting to make the race, let alone compete. Yet last weekend, the 4 driver team combinations that were in last chance qualifying were all full-time entries into the series. So does that boost the thinking of some people that want to put a program together that say, hey, that's a fact that we had some of these one-offs that I wouldn't say easily made the race, but were comfortably in the field, whereas these full-time efforts with established teams had problems. So in that respect, hopefully it leads to maybe some more one-offs heading into the future.
And I get it that the Chevy guy in the article you're talking about with Nathan Brown in the Indy Star basically, saying, oh, it's not the engine manufacturer's fault or whatever, right? Wasn't that kind of his?
Yeah, basically said, even though we know like they lose money on every engine lease, but
they pick and choose.
They do. And for instance, if Kyle Larson is the 18th with Chevy next year, and let's say Fernando Alonso is the 18th at Honda, like they're going to make it happen.
Correct.
Right. So it's all about that. But I think it's too is the incentive, and you can sell sponsors on a one-off now and say, hey, look at last year where these, as opposed to one-offs continuously missing the races, one-offs are making the race. I think that helps when you're pushing for sponsors and pushing for investments and making an effort and trying to put together a team for Indy only, is you can use this year as an example and say, hey, the bottom 4 spots competing for the 3 for the final row were all full-time teams, and that can mean a lot to people that are entertaining the thought of maybe entering a car next year or in the coming years as an Indy only entry.
And you look at Able Motorsports now, first time they qualify. HMD, I get that they're a sponsor and partnered with Coin, but they could split off. And they have a lot of cars and lights. You're seeing a bigger lights field, and eventually those teams will want to move up and have a shot at the Indy 500. I think we'll see that happen. It just comes down to you have to have your own chassis. If you're going to do it without a technical partnership with a full-time team, you have to have your own chassis. And I think that's the biggest key.
That's the one thing that teams are less inclined to loan out or rent out chassis, because these teams have more full-time entries, which means they need to have then more in the way of backup cars ready. And so they're less inclined to rent those out. So all of this kind of comes together. It's not as easy as saying, well, you need a third OEM, because I don't think that's the magic answer. I think it's more supply and demand and ability to make the race. And we saw that over the weekend in terms of the one-offs.
Meanwhile, at the front of the field, we expected Ganassi, we expected McLaren, and I don't really know what we expected from Penske going into it, but Alex Palou wins the pole, record pole speed, 234.217, wins by just 0.06 miles per hour over Rinus VeeKay. Very, very close. Not that that's a surprise, but I think going into it, we thought Palou would be a contender. We thought Dixon would be. VeeKay's always fast. Felix, Rossi, Santino Ferrucci, who qualified 4th, probably would have been higher if not for a fuel map setting issue, I think, on his first lap.
Yep.
That kind of limited his speed. You have the big teams up there, but what Foyt did over the weekend, impressive. Not just in the qualifying, but also showcasing their speed in the practice sessions, putting up 235s. This was a complete turnaround by this team. for a team that even throughout the course of the season, outside of, I think Ferrucci had a 11th or 12th at Long Beach, they've not really showed well anywhere. And to come to Indy, to bring Michael Cannon, who's been paired with Ferrucci in the past, and to have other people in place, this was just an incredible effort. I think a lot of people were rooting for them to do well. And to see AJ have an opportunity, like a legitimate opportunity, with not one but two cars qualifying well. Yes, it comes down to pit stops and strategy and getting lucky. But I would think at least one of those two cars will have a chance to be there at the end on Sunday.
I would put my money on Ferrucci if he could stay out of trouble, and you never know what happens at the 500. And I would still worry about putting together 6 or 7 consistent pit stops to make sure that nothing untoward happens. But what a boost for the Foyt racing team this past weekend. I mean, the pub that Foyt got over the weekend was equivalent to like the last 5 Indy 500s combined, right?
It's the best qualifying effort they've had going back to 2018 with Tony Kanaan and Matthias Lace. And they weren't even Fast 9 material or now Fast 12. I think they were like 11th and 13th on the grid, and Kanaan led laps. And that's really the last time they've been competitive at Indy.
And it was great to see AJ and all the pub that he got. He's always a magnet for attention, obviously, when he's at the Speedway, but even more so when he has some speed in his drivers. And he seems like a guy that's going to live forever, but it's great to see AJ at 88 years old, at least through qualifying weekend, to have two cars that you could consider contenders. And that's great to see. And hopefully it continues into Sunday, in which they have at least one. But as Townsend Bell said over the weekend, at some point over the qualifying, and basically talked to Larry Foyt and say, well, where's this coming from? I mean, and Larry was basically said a whole hell of a lot of money helps out. And that's what we're talking about with Rahal, Letterman, Lanningen, is where's that financial investment coming, the added capital, whether it comes from your team owners or a ride by or whatever, to help infuse some added capital and some added resources into that team. That's what it's done at AJ Foyt Racing, on top of not spreading yourself too thin and sticking with just two cars and saying, this is what we're going to focus on. I think more money and less in terms of less, I guess, bullets in the chamber, or less sticks in the fire to really have to worry about. Those two things compounded has really helped AJ Foyt Racing. You hope they have at least a legitimate run on Sunday, but great to see, at least for one weekend out of the season, Foyt have a good weekend.
Oh, and this is the race they care about. Let's not kid ourselves. I get it. Every team cares about the Indy 500 over any other race.
Yeah, but
for Foyt,
AJ couldn't care.
They run the full series, but really the Indy 500 is what it's about. And for them to have this payoff, it was phenomenal to see, especially a team that a lot of people talk about, smoke and mirrors maybe, right, as far as they're not, anywhere close to funded as some of the other teams, especially after ABC Supply went away on both full-time entries, and they dealt with the Rocket mess a couple years ago. But to see Peterson, a guy who won a lights race, comes in, look, he's bringing money for that ride. And then Ferrucci got hired. They've overhauled the engineering. Chevy is the preferred engine this year, at least in terms of speed at the front. I get it. You could say, well, Alex Palou and a Honda won pole, but I think he was an outlier when you look at the starting lineup. This was a phenomenal turnaround. It was great to see. It was refreshing to see, and you just hope that they can continue that and contend on Sunday.
You hope it's a great thing for Foyt. This is a team that we know doesn't have the financial resources. Even with this infusion of cash from Benjamin Peterson, it's helped, but they would love to be able to get a primary sponsor on the car, on both cars somewhere, right?
You have to remember, Foyt would have run a third car for the 500 if they got, a full sponsor on both entries. Yeah, they said that season. If they could get two, they would add a third. But that clearly did not happen. So hopefully what they can use the last weekend, as people want AJ Foyt Racing to succeed. And I think people would be more interested. Introducing yourself with AJ Foyt Racing, you're already in the door because of Foyt, right? But if you can point to some tangible results, then it's an easier sell, obviously. So if they can get some tangible results, particularly at the biggest race in the world this weekend, then I think that helps sell to sponsors and advertisers and potential partners more than, hey, we were AJ Foyt Racing, but we're not very good. And maybe they just needed, with all these new pieces in place with the team, 2 new drivers, new engineers, new crew. Yeah, just some time and having that extra track time to get everything dialed in. And now you hope, moving forward, we can start seeing a lot more pace from them week in and week out. We'll see, and we'll see what happens with them Sunday. The other teams at the front, McLaren, we expected them to be there. Now, we thought they'd get potentially all 4 drivers in the Fast 6, and instead they are limited to just 2, the 2 full-time entries, 2 of the 3 full-time entries, and Felix Rosenquist, who had the top time Saturday, and then Pato Award, and then 2 Ganassi entries, and 1 Ed Carpenter, and then 1 Foyt. Who would have thought that?
Yeah, right.
Only 1 Penske in the top 12, and Will Power. Do you want to talk Penske first or Ganassi first?
Look, Ganassi. Let's talk Ganassi first.
Let's talk Ganassi, because I think it was not a surprise that Ganassi won the pole. I think it was more a surprise that only one of them truly challenged. I mean, Dixon had speed, but it was never pole-worthy speed. Alex Palou was far and away the guy who had the speed when it came to the top 12 in Fast 6 qualifying. For him, what a turnaround it's been. He wins the Indy GP. He wins the pole for the Indy 500, and all this while he's going to McLaren next year. This is all so awkward and interesting at the same time.
He's been your pick since the GP to win the 500. He gets put on pole, earns the pole last weekend. I think Ganassi is fine. I mean, yeah, you thought maybe they would have more towards the top end outside of Palou, particularly how they ran on Saturday, but it's all sometimes because it was so close. Minuscule differences. They're all competitive. All 4 of them can win the race, and I think that's where Ganassi wants to be. It's great to have the pole, and we also have 4 cars that are capable of winning this thing, and I think Ganassi's comfortable. Whereas Penske, once again, seems to be on the struggle bus.
One note on Ganassi: Takuma Sato, every time he's qualified top 9, he's won the race. So just keep that in mind.
He's my guy too that I wanted to put money on before I get into the weekend and don't forget, because I think Palou's obvious pick right now to win. But even looking at it right now, and I'm going to look at it with the odds, is you just feel like every time with Sato in a competitive car, which he's in, could find a way. And he's at plus 1,200 right now. And I think for a 2-time winner that is in a car that's capable of winning the race, I think that's a steal right now at plus 1,200.
I think you look at Rossi, you look at Sato, you even look at Tony Kanaan as far as guys like to me, and I think we'll talk about more of this on Friday for the Carb Day show, but to me, you got to be in that top 10 to 12 range, in my opinion, to win based on what we've seen from where the winner's starting position has been the last handful of years. You could go all the way back to Rossi's win in 2016. I think that was the last time a winner came from a double-digit starting position.
Yeah, and you could say extenuating circumstances with fuel, right, in that one.
So, but Penske, they were just bumping each other out of that 12th
Yeah, they're at the
slot.
bottom part of that 12.
And that was the highlight. And I think a lot of people say, you can't count Team Penske out. Like, when are we going to say that this is a team that for the series is still the standard, but at Indy, for whatever reason, they just aren't getting it done? You go back to ever since Penske took over the Speedway in the series, he's had his hand off the day-to-day of the team for obvious reasons. Like, you got to pick a focus. He's running an entire
track, an entire series.
Yeah,
but that kind of hits on you when you like to vent about that, is people looking at Roger as opposed to maybe Tim Cindric.
Yeah, and I'm not saying like Tim's doing a bad job here. It's just a different style and leadership, and they're still winning series titles. So it's not like the drop-off is there. It's just at Indy in particular, for whatever reason, they've lost something. And you could pinpoint, well, it's also that the aero screen came in, and they haven't,
Yeah, but they have the most resources out of anybody to figure that out.
Correct. They have the funding. Now, I think you could argue McLaren has more funding because they're a bigger organization overall, but Penske's a billionaire. Let's not kid ourselves.
Well, and
here.
I think it's too. You still want to go to the established team. The best team is Penske.
They have they have a better driver lineup than McLaren. I get the McLaren has a lot of hype, but Scott McLaughlin, multi-time race winner, Will Power, multi-time IndyCar champion, Indy 500 winner, Joseph Newgarden, multi-time IndyCar champion.
Yeah.
I get that McLaren has more Indy 500 wins on their team, but Felix still hasn't won a race at McLaren. He's won poles. We think he's been close. Pato's won a handful of races, but we're still waiting for that breakthrough for him to be a 500 winner and/or series champion. Now, could that happen this year? Absolutely. Tony Kanaan won a 500. It's been a decade. Now this is a strong car, but it's still a one-off effort. So to me, Penske still with their 3 entries, I mean, they have 3 proven guys who can win on any kind of track, any week, and who can contend for a championship. McLaren, you could say that driver is still Pato Award, and that's it.
Unfortunately for Joseph Newgarden, starting 17th now in this race. And we heard it on 100 Days to Indy and all that stuff, how important Indy was and is. And who knows, maybe Joseph Newgarden comes out Sunday and wins the race. And then people can tell me to shut up. But when do we reach a point with Joseph Newgarden, who has had 1 podium at Indy all time, where that wasn't even with Penske, that he is underperforming? Not Penske, but he is underperforming at Indianapolis. When does it become a him thing and not a Team Penske thing? Because we've seen Will Power win this race. Scott McLaughlin, you expect him to be there, but Joseph Newgarden has raced in this race, 12 times? Is this going to be his 13th start?
I believe it is his 13th start, and Kanaan won in his 11th start?
And that felt like a long time coming with Tony Kanaan. And when does Joseph Newgarden...
This is his 12th start.
Okay, when does Joseph Newgarden open himself up to criticism that he is one that can't get it done at Indy? And when does he reach Michael Andretti territory, where it starts being concerning if he's ever going to win one? Now, of course, this all goes out the window if and when he wins on Sunday, but I just find Joseph Newgarden phenomenally likable, and that's probably why we don't hear that narrative, is blaming Joseph Newgarden for the struggles. It's more of a team thing, and I think you fall in the same thing with Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan, and Graham Rahal, and you can have a conversation about that too, and maybe we'll have it here in a bit. But when does it fall on Joseph Newgarden as not performing? And my dad kind of he's a big Joseph Newgarden fan. He kind of mentioned this tongue-in-cheek, but it's true. It's like Joseph Newgarden should just do exactly what Scott Dixon does on race day at Indy. Because Scott Dixon just somehow, some way, luck or not, will find himself in the conversation on Sunday again. Just whatever he does, you do in terms of pit strategy and all that stuff, because Joseph Newgarden is 0 for 11 and hopes to change that on Sunday, but is starting 17th. It's a tough position to start.
And for him, I mean, you're getting to that point where to go that long until your first win, I think Sam Hanks has the record, if I'm not mistaken, as far as Indy 500 starts before first Indy 500 win. But Newgarden's in that dangerous territory because at some point, you're just not going to win this race.
Yeah, and even his wife said it on 100 Days to Indy. Every year, the pressure
Hanks
mounts.
won is in his 13th. Newgarden's starting his 12th. So that pressure moves up and up and up. And for the best American driver of this generation by far,
right,
to have not won the Indy 500, it's shocking, right? Because every year we go into the season Justin Newgarden, he's going to win the Indy 500, race, especially because he's been with Penske now for several years. But it happens to coincide with the down years of Penske, not just in the race, but in qualifying. I think their best result in the Indy 500 in the Aero Screen era was a fifth? And that was Newgarden in 2020, and he was never a contender.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the issue is obviously Andretti, but when does it become a point where, and the parallels to Michael Andretti, arguably the greatest American driver of his generation, right? Never won an Indianapolis 500. Is the book already being written on Joseph Newgarden, winning multiple titles, winning a lot of races, greatest American driver of his generation?
Well, at least Newgarden doubled up Michael on titles, because Michael only won the 91 kart title.
Yeah.
And you think about how many races he won, 42 races in his career, and Newgarden's going to end his career probably at or above Michael in race wins. He's already at 26. So,
but
you sure
without that 500 win.
Yeah.
And how long do we go until we start looking at it and say, maybe it just doesn't happen?
And for Will Power on the downward side of his career, I mean, he's still competitive. He obviously won the title last year, But the race wins aren't coming as often. A lot of drivers 42 years old in this field. He's one of them. And then for Scott McLaughlin, a guy who outside of Texas, finishing in second in what last year, like we need to see more growth on ovals. And part of that's just inexperience, right? But at the same time with Penske, you don't have that longer leash to get there. And you want to see that happen. And to me, they're great drivers as far as their discipline on all different kinds of tracks. But at Indy, the last several years, this team has simply not been in the conversation. I think that's something, if you're a Penske fan or a fan of the drivers, and something I think we want to see, prove us that you can still be a contending team for wins of the Indy 500, because it's shocking. Even though it's just been since 2019, it's shocking it's been this long.
When you're the power team in the series, there's a lot of onus on you to perform all the time. And when you're not, then you're open to criticism. And that's kind of where we're at with Penske. But would I be surprised if Will Power won this race Sunday? No. Joseph Newgarden? No. Scott McLaughlin? No. But
I'll disagree. I'll be surprised if any of them win.
Really?
Because I think, again, they're starting outside the top 10. And to me, you got to be one of those cars up front. Like, qualifying is important again. We had a stretch where you had drivers starting outside the top 10 for a couple of years. You go back to, with the early years in the DW12, qualifying, maybe wasn't as important. I feel like qualifying is back to being very important. Now, not like you got to start front row as far as what we saw, often in the 80s, for example, but I think it's just really important now. And even a stretch in the 2000s where the racing was less than ideal, like 2009, 2010, right?
Right.
Where it was pretty hard to pass the end of the previous Delora era. But I just think you got to qualify up front, and Penske's not doing that.
I think you can still win from mid-pack. You just need a lot more to go, right? And we really haven't heard much this week, and maybe we'll start getting this conversation on Friday, but how is it going to race on Sunday?
Yeah.
Are we going to see a lot of passing?
I think it's weather dependent.
The weather looks great. It's going to be mid 70s
and mid to upper 70s to low 80s. That's the forecast trending.
But can these cars run better with the added aero and downforce levels and all that stuff in traffic?
And I heard Pato say, I think after the open test, if your car 1 or 2, you can pass, but if you're back in the pack, it's really tough.
And we haven't heard much of that in practice with that conversation. Is it the same as what you expected? Is it different than what you expected? Is it easier to run behind somebody? Is it easier to get a run? Is it more difficult to get a run? Well, I just haven't heard those questions been answered, albeit because there's been plenty of other storylines. But I hope as the week continues and we get into Friday and hopefully maybe when we have some of our additional driver interviews this week, we can ask Romain Grosjean and Pato Ward hey, how is the car in traffic comparable to the last couple of years? And do you expect a more passes or less passes or same amount? Or do you want to be running first as opposed to second late? And all those conversations, hopefully we get some answers this week, because we're kind of entering the weekend right now as not having a lot of answers.
All right, let's get to Stefan Wilson, Graham Rahal. First off, obviously best wishes to Steph as he recovers and undergoes surgery actually today, Wednesday, as we record, to continue to help heal his back after suffering a fractured vertebrae. Nasty crash. It was bizarre with leg running into the back of him in turn number 1, and everyone got checked up, and she just ran out of space and time to check up on Wilson. So he's out, and moving forward, Graham Rahal gets the seat. Honda guy, first ever race in a Chevy. He did do a race Iowa, I think, in 2009 with Brian Reinbold Racing. So it's been a bit, but good to see this happen. He was the obvious choice. He already had track time. Now he's going to have to learn a lot, right? The positive is they're both tall drivers, and so that maybe that transition from the car, but going from a Honda to a Chevy to a different team where your steering wheel setup's different. And Graham even saying, I think in a Racer.com article, I'll take a screenshot of the steering wheel and, memorize everything. He'd already talked with Ryan Hunter-Reay about different map settings on the car. So there's a lot to learn. And in fact, both drivers, there's a lot to learn because Brian Hunter-Reay was a Honda guy forever. So that will be interesting to watch. But I think the other thing is, if Chevy has the pace in the race like we think it will, he'll have an opportunity to shoot right past his teammates, maybe as soon as lap number 1.
Yeah, he'll be the fastest guy back there based on car performance, right? So he's going to be surrounded by his teammates from RLL, yet will probably have the fastest car out of all of them. He's not going to factor into winning this race, but if he can climb into mid-pack, I think it'd be good. It's good to have Rahal in the show. Unfortunately, it comes at the expense of Stefan Wilson, and just a terrible situation for him, and hopefully his recovery goes well. It's nice for Rahal to be in, but it doesn't take away the pain of not making it with your home team. But it worked out this way. Good to see Graham starting it, but
and this was an example of relationship building. Obviously, Graham was teammates with Justin Wilson.
Yeah.
And it was close with the Wilson family, so he has that obvious tie-in. He even mentioned that the Carekeepers guy is donated to Graham's foundation, and so they have that relationship. United Rentals, Fifth Third Bank will carry over. They'll find a way to make this work. I'll be curious to see what the car looks like.
Right.
But this is good for all parties involved. I think I'm just glad that Honda and Chevy work together to make it happen.
In the end, I mean, Honda and Chevy are rivals, but they're also partners in the sport in IndyCar. They work a lot together with the hybrid technology and all that stuff. Like, I don't think it's a big of a hurdle, Honda and Chevy, now as it used to be in IndyCar, and it's not obviously as big of the rivalries in Formula One and even NASCAR with engine manufacturer. I think first and foremost, Honda and Chevy are partners. They want to beat each other, particularly at the 500, but they also will work together to do what's best for the sport. And the best thing for the sport was Graham Rahal being in a seat. They made it happen, and it's great to see.
Graham Rahal and Catherine Legg will each get a hardship shakedown of their new cars, 15 minutes of track time Thursday. Obviously, they'll have the 2-hour carb day practice session as well to really get their cars dialed in. So that's a added bonus for both of them. All right. If you agree or disagree with what we've had to say, well, we'd love for you to interact with us. You can find us, newtrackrecordpodcast.com. While you're there, sign up for the email list. You'll never miss an episode or any special announcements. A lot of emails going out this week because, well, we've had episodes every day, if not multiple a day. So sign up to the email list. It's free. Also, check out the store. We have t-shirts and stickers for sale there. On social media, on Facebook, just search for New Track Record. You can find us there. Instagram and Twitter, IndyCar Podcast is the handle. You can always email us, newtrackrecordpodcast@gmail.com. You can support us via Patreon, patreon.com/newtrackrecord. Thanks to Xavier, Rob, Stitch, and others for their support. And you can support us starting at just $1 per month. And as always, you can listen in for free on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, etc. Again, all for free. Mailbag time, and we have some items to get to, a lot based on Indy 500 qualifying. Mom 2X over 2002. And also shout out to her because her brother in the U.S. Army deployed, and he's the one who turned her onto the podcast. So a shout out to him, the Blackjack Brigade from Fort Cavazos, currently deployed overseas. She says, hoping he gets to watch 500. So that's really cool. So listening to the GP recap, we don't have cable and only watch via Peacock. Peacock ratings should be counted. Yes, the problem is NBC picks and chooses when they release those numbers.
Well, and I imagine they would release them if they were very high.
Yes.
That's kind of my thing. Because we have ratings that have come out for the weekend. Did you see this for qualifying weekend?
Yes.
Relatively flat from last year.
I'm not
5.6.
I'm not qualifying as an in-person crowd. It's not for the TV viewer. I'm not really concerned about it.
But the fact that you didn't have anybody that NBC has yet to mention the Peacock number for qualifying weekend tells me it wasn't great. Even though that's
for the race, I'm sure they'll mention it because I'm sure it will be great.
Yes, and every little bit counts on the TO. And here's where I have a problem with Peacock, and we're advocates of Peacock here for sure. So take Saturday. So qualifying coverage started at 11 o'clock, correct?
Yes.
Did we have a practice on Saturday morning?
Yes.
Okay.
But there was a long gap because that was from 8:30 to 9:30.
And I had that on at home. So it was live. I watched that live. I had to work on Saturday, but only part of the day. Like I was going to get home around 4 or 4:30. So, but unfortunately, the qualifying coverage on Peacock was one gigantic 7-hour block. And you can't rewind all the way back to the beginning. I don't know if it's like a 3-hour or 2.5 hour. You can only go back a maximum amount. So when I started watching, I could only go back to an hour into qualifying. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing that. I want to watch it right from the beginning. I couldn't do that. I have to wait till 6 o'clock and the replay then is posted to then start watching from the beginning. So I was playing catch up, and you were trying to text with me to discuss storylines, but I couldn't because I didn't have any information. And then I'd text you when things would happen, and you're like, well, just wait, blah, blah, blah. But they have to make it easier for Peacock. They have to break that broadcast up. Ideally, it's a 11 to 2 because the broadcast was 2 to 4 on NBC. Make it 11 to 2 block, 2 to 4 block, 4 to 6 block. But no, they had a whole 7-hour continuous coverage. So I couldn't watch. So as great as it was, effectively 7 hours with not much in the way of commercial breaks, except the 2 to 4 for NBC, I couldn't scroll back and watch all the way from the beginning at 4:30. I had to wait till it was all over. And that was frustrating.
Yes. And that's the downside. When it's live, you can't go back to what's already happened in live time. That is a frustration I have had as well over time. You posted a poll. What are people more interested in at the time, the race for the pole or last chance qualifying? No surprise, 66% to nearly 34% people more interested in last chance qualifying. Carter 1971J said C, both. Vicky Lane 26, definitely the LCQ. The emotions quickly shifted once it was go fast time. Listening to Palou's pit ask him, are you ready to go really fast? And then watch him do exactly that was awesome. DC Soda, I really don't care about row 11. I want to see how fast someone can go around IMS. Yesterday should have been pole day and today needs to be bump day. Give them both the focus they deserve on different days. That I can get behind. I fully agree with that.
I would definitely agree. For me, much more exciting on the back end of the field.
Shevchenko, last chance qualifying is the most exciting, but that doesn't mean I'm not excited to see if we can get a pull over 234 miles per hour. I just wish they were both separate so they each had time for us to kind of dive into them and not gloss over the other. Because to me, the storyline out of the weekend was Graham Rahal failing to qualify, not necessarily Alex Palou getting the pull, because when you put them back to back, you pick and choose. And it was the same thing in 2019, right? With Alonso missing the race and Kaiser getting in. That was our takeaway. It was not Simon Pageant winning the pole. Like, give them each their time.
Right, definitely.
Indy 500 Trump, having more than 33 cars puts more juice into the whole week. And only be passing mention of Ilott and Rahal's struggles without the chance of missing the race. Difference between 33 and 34 is huge.
Do you like the format in the sense that they do bumping before the pole? Or would you like them flip-flopped?
I would like pole day on Saturday, bump day on Sunday.
But then nobody runs on Sunday. That's the problem, is you do that and nobody's going out on track on Sunday, other than the last chance qualifier. True. So that's
why they have the format the way it is. Now, It is for TV, but also because unless you're going to have 40 plus entries, like even with 36 entries, there's not enough intrigue.
Yeah.
I mean, you just have the same four cars, making runs constantly. So you got to have 40 plus entries. Now, would I love to go back to having 4 days of qualifying? Yes, that's also not realistic.
Correct.
But I think 2 full days of qualifying, if we can get more entries in this race, that would require more than 40 entries.
But they've done it for TV, and also it's worked for in person, because we mentioned earlier in the podcast the crowd both on Saturday and Sunday. It's worked to get people to the track both days.
Yes, and I think that is key. Some other notes from Beyond the Flag. Not only that, talking about you mentioned this, running for pole is exciting, but bumping just hits different, even if it's just one car. So it's back to an every year thing. And Beyond the Flag saying, not only that, but let's hope this schedule is a permanent fixture of the weekend. It's perfect for any number over 33. Yes, I would say once you hit 40, though, then you actually should just shift to having pole day, bump day.
But I don't see that anytime soon. Becoming that crazy again. I just don't. There's not enough money. There's not enough engines. Quite frankly, right now, I highly doubt there's enough chassis to even get to 40.
True.
You know what I mean? So
you posted this, the fact a full-time IndyCar driver didn't qualify and the 4 drivers in LCQ all being full-timers help woo more partial or Indy-only entries to the Speedway. And we talked about that.
Yep.
Cole de Chaubert said teams want to do it. Honda and Chevy don't produce the engines for it. And it is more complicated than that. I think also there's a shortage of chassis. Like in years past, think about it. You could show up with a year-old chassis. Now, yes, some of these chassis are old and have been around for a long time, but there aren't multiple manufacturers. So you don't have a Penske chassis, a Lola, a Reynard, a Dan Gurney, chassis. You don't have a March, a Gallmer. Like you could show up with your own chassis based on the rules and regulations. It's different.
It is different. And I think a lot of it, has to do with money. Is if you are the 38th driver team combination to sign up, is how are you going to be able to get proper investment and capital to convince somebody that we're going to beat 5 other cars to make this race? And
it's not just having a third OEM.
Exactly. It's not just a third OEM, because then I think you just cut back and you say, okay, each team's probably just going to, or each OEM is only going to have, say, 12 max.
Yes.
Because that's what you're going to see. I don't think you all of a sudden have a third OEM jumping in and say, yeah, we're going to support 17 too. And you're at what, 51?
That's not happening. You'll be lucky to hit 40.
Yes. It helps, but still, is who's going to be that 40th team that has enough qualified personnel, driver, equipment, money to say we're going to beat 7 other drivers to make this race? It's difficult.
In a way, having spec, which has made the racing better, having a spec series, is also the same reason why we don't have more entries.
Yeah.
Like if you had multiple chassis manufacturers and they found enough value to do it, that would help. And I get it. TV ratings would fix everything. If the Indy 500 doubled their TV rating from last year, this year, and then you're talking 6, 7, 8, 9 ratings, like a 9 or 10, which they're getting, pre-split. Like, yeah, you're going to have a lot more interest because that's just the reality. Like there are more people watching.
Yeah, so absolutely.
That's another factor. Vicky Lynn, 26, possibly. If I were someone contemplating trying to run the 500 this past weekend, would definitely get me thinking we had more than a slim chance of making it for sure. Tyler_Allen. I think the catalyst for more entries lies with Honda and GM. Again, I still think it's more complicated. Poet Shevchenko, I think so. It won't be the only factor, though. If the news of high track attendance during practice and qualifying weekends are true, I think those will also encourage Indy-only entries again. I don't know if the attendance is going to impact a team, but I think more so what Able Motorsports did impacts a team.
I definitely agree. I think Catherine Legg, too. You come in as a part-time entry, yes, with an established team, but you're the fastest. That helps. But yeah, Able Motorsports has to be really the catalyst with this, at least for this year. Plus the fact that everybody in the last chance qualifying was full-time entries.
All right, time for news and notes. Plenty of items to rifle through here. So let's start to the items a bit further back from last week. We'll also get to some qualifying notes that we did not get to as well. So starting off, Kyle Larson, obviously there last week on a practice day with Jeff Gordon, but Justin Marks, owner of Trackhouse there. Now, he's always mentioned, oh yeah, we'd love to run the Indy 500 someday, but you just wonder if that's sooner rather than later.
Could potentially be, particularly if he was there and really got the itch. Now, he's been there before, hasn't he?
I think so.
But if he keeps coming back and keeps falling in love with the drama and excitement, then maybe it's something that happens sooner rather than later, particularly as he continues to have success on the Cup side.
Yeah, we shall see. Meanwhile, for the Indy 500 this year, a couple of announcements. Jewel will sing the national anthem. Adam Driver, Mishawaka native, will be the honorary starter. So some more of those announcements coming in. Let's see what else. As far as qualifying notes, the tie between Ed Carpenter and Tony Kanaan, that was unbelievable in qualifying speed.
Just incredible.
At one
how
point
close.
On Saturday for a top 12 spot. Now the tie, it goes to who set the time first. 84 qualifying attempts on Saturday. You thought there'd be a lull. They did a track inspection after all the first runs, and they were right back at it.
All day. And And this is one thing that NBC got wrong is here's what I would love to see with the NBC crew, and do a great job. But they kept teasing on Saturday that the temps were getting warmer and warmer, and eventually you would hit that threshold. And I know Joseph Newgarden talked about it was the 115 degree track temperature, but it never was going to get warm enough for that. I mean, you mentioned being at the track, and early on it was cool and it warmed up, but never to the level that it was going to completely make the track hot and greasy and make the middle part of the day that we see so often just you can't qualify during it. It was something that continued to deliver. And you have two former drivers who are great. You have great pit reporters, and Steve Letard, who was better this year, but he's still background is in stock cars. Like, they need a former crew chief, former engineer to discuss this stuff that can actually give good feedback and good intelligence, because that's what's sorely lacking with the NBC crew.
This from Chad 200 on qualifying. Third straight pole for Chip Ganassi Racing. First time since 91 that former winners filled an entire row. And that would be row number 3 with Rossi, Sato, and Kanaan. Also, Meyershank Racing starting 20th and 22nd. Juncos 27th and 28th. All 4 spots have won the race, 8 total. 93, Rahal bumped, Ganassi on pole. 2023, Rahal bumped, Ganassi on pole. So go figure. Benjamin Peterson, who we talked to earlier this week, fastest 1-lap qualifying speed by a rookie. Let's see, other qualifying notes. Tightest front row that's ever been seen. Obviously a pole speed record as well for that. So just so many records falling over the weekend, and it was fun to see. And look, speed sells, right? People show up for speed, and we saw that with the qualifying crowds. All
European front row for the first time, correct? No Americans in the top 6. I think is an interesting stat. Hopefully the crowd that says we need more Americans in the series don't chime in, because who would you say are the 3 most popular drivers in the series right now? Tony Kanaan, Elio, and Pato O'Ward?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, as far as for the Indy 500.
Yeah.
Kanaan's not full-time, but as far as Elio, the series goes.
And then you would add Romain Grosjean in there.
Yeah.
All 4 of those guys are in the top 5. None of them are Americans.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Go figure. Yeah. I mean, Pato is far and away, I'd say, the most popular driver. There's so much McLaren gear.
You mentioned it, too.
Some Kanaan stuff, but mostly Pato stuff.
Mostly Pato McLaren stuff is what you saw over the weekend. Huh?
And it helps when you have your own
trailer.
Booth.
Yeah.
You know, not hauler. A trailer, but they had like a pop-up. Plus, McLaren had their own merch trailer as well.
So there's just one for Pato only. Pato only merch.
He has and he has like sombreros. He signed a bunch of stuff. Nice. One of his sponsors, Electrolit, was giving away, free samples and stuff, which they did last year. So it was a good activation by the McLaren team. And look, you have a driver who's brash, who's young, who's talented, and we're seeing that with a fan base that's growing.
Great to see.
Absolutely. Other notes, Marcus Ericsson, this from Jenna Fryer. Word on the street, 2 top teams have reached out to the defending 500 winner, saying they'll have offers for him when he's allowed to speak to them. One of them starts with an A. The other one is already getting a different Ganassi driver. So they both start with A, but that would be Andretti and Arrow McLaren. If Chip lets Marcus leave, that's on him.
Cheap Chip has to stop being Cheap Chip.
Yes.
He's letting Palou walk. He cannot let Marcus Ericsson walk.
No.
And could you imagine, we were messaging this about this, if next year's McLaren lineup at Indy is Pato, Palou, Rossi, Ericsson, Kyle Larson?
Wild.
It's stupid.
Yes.
I mean, we could say it hasn't hit that threshold yet, but McLaren has clearly come into the sport and completely transcended the
driver market.
Yeah, the market, and just the power rankings of the sport is they've come in and they're spending money. They're spending money on drivers. They're spending money on personnel.
I mean, they ripped Gavin Ward away from Penske, and he had a non-compete. And then look what they did from an engineering standpoint at McLaren. Meanwhile, Penske was mid-pack.
And I know Taylor Kyle goes from McLaren to Ganassi, and that was kind of maybe the only thing we've seen in terms of going the other way. But McLaren is in it for real, and eventually the 500s wins are going to start coming. Eventually, you feel the championships are going to start coming. but they've very much come in and really disrupted the landscape of what IndyCar was. And I think it's all positive. And Chip needs to catch up and start playing the game, or he's going to left. Scott Dixon's not getting any younger. Mike Hall's not getting any younger. You would imagine Taylor Kyle is that guy to ascend to Mike Hall's position when he's done, when he retires. But at the same time, you're letting talented drivers go out the door, and it's difficult to. How long did we talk about when is Ganassi going to find somebody that's going to be a primary driver outside of Scott Dixon because he wasn't getting younger? You had Alex Palou. You're
now
going to let
he's
him
leaving.
leave, and Marcus Ericsson's getting overtures from elsewhere.
Eventually, you gotta
open
up the checkbook.
You gotta pay money.
Absolutely. So the milk choices are in. Most drivers picking whole. The lone exceptions: Catherine Legg went skim. Benjamin Peterson went 2%. Romain Grosjean went skim. Elsewhere, Sato went 2%. And I think there's one. Elio went 2% as well. Everyone else picked whole. I would do whole just because of I'm a 2% guy, but I would do whole.
Oh man, I just don't know if after 500 miles in Indianapolis, the thing I want to be drinking is whole milk. I know it's the moment, of course, but the last thing I need is my stomach to reject whole milk coming down and I regurgitate it on top of Victory Lane. I'm going 2%.
I can understand that. Meanwhile, AJ Foyt with an interesting comment talking about F1 as far as should IndyCar feel threatened. No, I don't think so. I wouldn't cross the street to go watch a Formula One race because you know who's going to win. That's not racing.
Yeah, well, it's racing for a lot of people.
Yes, we shall see. Also, speaking of other legends, the Unser Museum is leaving Albuquerque for a much larger Museum of American Speed in Nebraska. So they'll have a lot more space. Apparently, this was part of the plan. I've been to the Unser Museum. It's
really?
very, very cool.
Is it? Man, the Unser Museum's leaving. The Arizona Coyotes are leaving. Everybody's vacating Arizona, which I will be this weekend in Arizona.
In Arizona. Well, that's in New Mexico, the Albuquerque.
Well, I'll be in the Southwest. Yes.
You'll be close.
Everybody leaving the Southwest. Yeah, I'll be close. First time I've ever been out there.
So should be interesting and hot. Very, very hot.
Yeah, I think the lowest temperature is this weekend's 99. It's one of those things that it's almost nice. Like I've hardly ever checked the weather because I know what it's going to be. It's going to be 100 degrees and no rain and sun.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
It's not hard to know how hot it's going to be out there. It's pretty standard.
It's a dry heat, they'll say.
Oh, yeah. It's still hot. Once it gets above about 90 degrees, that's when the threshold really starts to wear. And I've experienced 114 degrees. It's hot. It is absolutely really, really hot. Other notes to get to. Dinner with Racers has bumped Risking It All for Indy. This is a good episode you can watch on YouTube. I think the Mario Dominguez entry with Rahal, and let's see, what year would this have been? I forget the year that it was, 2006, 7. But it's talking about that. So interesting thing to check out there. Marshall Pruitt. He survived the Catherine Legg Graham Rahal crash.
Was way close.
The photo he has is wild. I mean, it's basically him trying to move to get out the way. Other notes. Let's not forget the Pato Award and Scott Dixon starting side by side in row number 2 on Sunday after their 100 Days to Indy interview.
Which was great to see. We need more of that.
Yes. David Malukas, he'll kick off the Race to the Clouds for the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb in a Gotham Gray Acura TLX Type S PMC edition, which is the pace car of the event. So that's really cool to get to have that opportunity. Meanwhile, Max Verstappen, possible 4th US F1 race. F1 trying to steal IndyCar again here. He suggested Laguna Seca.
Has it hosted a F1 event?
No, I don't believe so. Meanwhile, back in IndyCar, Colton Herta, if you haven't seen the video, as surprised as that, Brian with a race-winning car he had. I think it was his the 98 Shell car. Really, really cool video. Was able to surprise him. Meanwhile, Colton and Grosjean and Kyle Kirkwood and Michael Andretti all star in the Motor Homies, which is a spoof on Bus Bros. Very funny.
Is it? I haven't watched it yet. I've seen the preview, but
it's very funny. And This is wild. So rumor dropped and now it's been confirmed. Alonso plans to stay at least until the end of 2026. Now, that's the rumor, but what is true is Honda is with Aston Martin now. And there are talks for Alonso to return to the Indy 500, likely with Andretti Autosport.
Could you have both Kyle Larson and Fernando Alonso at next year's 500 trying to qualify?
Depends on how the Monaco schedule sets up.
But the thing is, the beauty of Formula One and the dominance of one team, Aston Martin is, I guess they're competing for manufacturers.
It would
top
work
3.
because Monaco's earlier. It's the same weekend as the GP next year.
Oh, really? It doesn't coincide with that?
Yeah, because it doesn't coincide with the Indy 500 every year. They've kind of shifted the schedule.
Yeah, well, let's do it. You heard it here first. Fernando Alonso is going to do the 24 500.
James Hinchcliffe, so he referenced Daisy, I think. I don't know if it was over the week. So we finally got the full story. So Marco Andretti called him one day, said, I'm buying you something, but only if you promise to use it every day in May. That's all I got. Obviously, I agreed. Daisy showed up. If you've seen or heard this thing driving around Indy, now you know why. Need to call Graham Rahal Performance now. It is, I don't know, what kind of car is that? Is it an old Nissan or?
Let's see.
It is hilarious.
It's a Maybach car. It's a brand of car.
Okay. It is a blue little
it's a
2-door tiny car, basically.
Yeah.
And he's driving it around. It does need some updates.
It's got
great. Some Canadian bumper stickers and #1 Marco Andretti fan on it, which is really funny. Runs on maple syrup is one of the bumper stickers.
Yeah, it's a Nissan Maybach, basically.
Okay.
It looks like a car that you could pick up and carry under your arm.
Yes.
Basically what it looks like.
Very tiny. All right, time for Tweets of the Week. This from Jake Query with IndyCar Radio. This Sunday, approximately 1 in every 1,000 people in America will be here. Picture of IMS. Isn't that wild to think about?
Like that's absolutely
it's
insane.
True.
Yes.
But it's insane. Other tweets of the week this week. There are a couple others. A little sneeze there.
Man, I'm like you. It snuck up on me.
Yes. This from Kiffin Simpson, who's a development driver for Ganassi and Indy Lights. 235, and it's the meme of David Malukas' face. If you know from over the weekend of
he was very
it looks
animated.
Like an emoji. As far as him like is kind of jaw dropping. It was pretty funny. And then this one. Why is an ex-NASCAR crew chief the guy explaining the intricacies of an IndyCar wheel? That from Joey Barnes, 85, who's with IndyCar. Can't agree more.
Yes, you have now, I think Steve Letarte did do a decent job, but he shouldn't be on the 500 broadcast. Somebody that give me a Larry McReynolds type that's actually worked in IndyCar.
That's the part, I find it offensive when they put NASCAR guys on IndyCar broadcasts. We saw it with Rusty Wallace.
Yeah.
We see it now.
Dale Jr.'s fine.
Dale Jr.'s fine because it's only race day, and he's coming at it from a perspective of he's like a fan who just adds a different
he's the spectacle
element.
type thing.
The problem is they're trotting out Steve Letarte like he's some sort of expert.
Right, and he's not. And he knows he's not. At least he's admitted as much. But like, if he's supposed to be, and he's not like a household name where it's like, oh, this is going to gain us viewers like Dale Jr. is. It's like, why do you have Steve Letarte on this broadcast? I don't understand. And it didn't deliver over the weekend.
I'm sure they could find someone, or maybe someone they had in the past who could explain all those intricacies. I don't know, like Jan Beekes, maybe.
Oh, maybe.
I get that ship, unfortunately, is probably sailed by now, but still missed from the technical aspect on the broadcast.
Totally is. Absolutely.
All right. Random split air driver of the week time.
All right. We're going to kart, and we're going to go to 2000. We're going to go to Dale Coyne Racing and talk about Takuya Kurosawa.
Who?
From Japan. Takura Kurosawa raced for one season with Dale Coyne Racing. He raced only about half of the season in 2000 for Coyne, and his best finish was 12th at Detroit. He raced, 8 total races, withdrew from Milwaukee, did not start at Nazareth, did not start at, Michigan that year. But that was just one and done. He raced in a lot of Japanese racing series, Formula 3, Formula 3000, also did Le Mans. but obtained sponsorship to drive in kart in 2000. 8 starts with the best finish of 12th. Like I said, first Japanese driver to lead a champ car race when he led 7 laps at the Long Beach Grand Prix. He then went back to Japan and raced some formulas there. But that's about it. And that was his one and done. 8 races total with Dale Coyne Racing. And that was it. Headed back to Japan.
And he teamed with, at least on the team now, not necessarily at the same time, but Galter Salas. I think we've covered him as the random split air driver. Tarso Marquez, who had a Penske ride, right, for a bit. And Alex Barron, an IRL guy, who I remember from the Team Cheever Red Bull days. So
I do too. And I do believe what engines were they running? Was it just Ford Cosworth or no?
They were Ford Cosworth as far as Coyne.
No, they had to be Honda, right?
In the IRL, Alex Barron would have been like Infinity, I think.
See, that's what's interesting is there was sponsorship gained by Kurosawa, and I presumed it was just a Toyota or Honda.
So he was Ford.
It was actually
Cosworth.
Ford Cosworth, yeah.
Yeah, but
so, which is interesting.
I meant Alex Barron was in Infinity with Team Cheever, but yes, these are blast from. What's crazy is I look at kart in 2000. I'm like, okay, how many like teams have carried over even to today? But it's a surprising amount. Team Green, which became Andretti Green, which is now Andretti Autosport. Their participant, obviously Dale Coyne, been around forever. Team Rahal, which is now Rahal, Letterman, Lanigan Racing.
Ganassi,
Team Penske, and Ganassi.
Yep.
So a surprising amount.
PPI Motorsports did not make it over.
But they had Oriol Servia and Cristiano D'Amata. So
yeah, decent lineup. But yeah, first driver to ever lead a kart race, Mr. Takuya Kurosawa, this week's Random Split Era Driver of the Week.
4 OEMs, 2000 in kart.
And multiple
plus
chassis. Just
Reynard, Swift, Lola, as far as the chassis manufacturers. Now, there's only one Swift, and that was with Coyne, but it just goes to show you, like, this was how it was back in the day. And I get
heyday, I guess you could say, at least for kart.
Kart's heyday, you could say, was what, mid 80s to about 2000.
Yeah. Late
and then
90s.
it really fell off because they still had a lot of success post split. And then the 2001 season when they had to cancel Texas, that's when everything
started falling apart.
Everything went downhill right after that.
Yep. It was very quick.
All right. Well, be sure to look for more special episodes of driver interviews this week. Plus, don't forget to join us for our Carb Day live show, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern. You can listen at 1380thefan.com. Text us, the text line number 46862, or tweet us at IndyCar Podcast and participate in that. Again, Friday on Carb Day, 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern, our live show. Stream live at 1380thefan.com. We'll post the podcast after the fact. For Justin Kinney, I'm Caleb Hatch. This has been New Track Record Podcast.
Podcasts by Federated Media.